Hello and welcome to Focus 54, your real field of African news. My name is Jeffrey Mrimbechi. Today's episode is very heated up. It's all about the African free trade, continental trade area. And I've got two pit bulls that will be coming through to fight out all the issues that are related to this. And in 2023, we take stock of what exactly we are doing. Have we made any progress, any real progress? And trust me, this is not all about public relations. This is about the truth and the real situation that's happening in Africa. But before that, we start off with the headlines of things that are happening in Africa. And we start off with positive news, absolutely positive news. We go to East Africa, where a young female student in Rwanda is changing the agro-tech game, creating a new age tool helping small-scale farmers. Her name is Theofrida Muginga from the University of Rwanda, created something called Kulima GTP, which is a Swahili chatbot that helps farmers detect crop diseases and providing cultural sensitive agricultural advice. So all the people in rural areas will be able to use AI for their farming solutions. We'll move to Niger, where the marketing of Nigerian crude oil on the international market will begin in January. And this was announced by General Tiani, who is the head of the military regime which ruled the state and under a regional sanction since the coup of July this year. And we touched down in Ghana, where a resounding call to harness Africa's rich cultural tapestry. Filmmakers across the continent are being urged to pool their resources and collaborate effectively to propel growth. Now, the call echoes louder as Ghana plays a host to the inaugural African Cinema Summit aimed at revitalizing the cinematic landscape in the continent. Stay tuned for a second segment. We do have two guests in studio, Rutendo Matinyarare and Dr. Leopold Chakanyuka, and we'll be talking about those free trade areas, so do stay tuned. Welcome to the second segment of Focus 54, and I did say that this segment is a big powerhouse because we have two guests in studio, two very loud voices and big authorities in terms of African matters, in terms of current affairs, and they're specialists and well respected within their own regard. And when I say the name Rutendo Matinyarare, it will spark a lot of interest on social media, and I know that you will be sharing this and reviewing this, and this will make it into many other publications, as well as Dr. Leopold Chakanyuka, who is, I think, he is one man who might actually steal this show away from me because of the number of times you have come through and given us your nuggets. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you for inviting us.
I don't think you need any intros that are longer than this because we really need to get into the heart and the matter of what we're talking about. We want to be talking about the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. How far have we progressed in the year 2023? I know as broadcasters, as presenters and journalists, we keep talking about this, but what are the real key regional, economic and geopolitical implications of the progress that we've made so far?
I think to begin with, in terms of the African Free Trade Continental Area, we need to understand that is still something that is in its infancy. But of course, so there are certain stages that we have to undergo for us to fully implement the trade agreement. But of course, we have noted some of the implementation, especially on the protocol on free movement of people. We have seen certain countries such as Rwanda, I think, which has opened its borders to all African countries. Kenya, I think from January, I'm sure they will be allowing everyone to come to their country. And I also had the debate between Zimbabwe and Botswana, where we are now working towards removing the passport between the two countries. Botswana and Namibia, they are already, on that. So I'm saying it's one area which I think we have made progress so far. But of course, there are so many other areas where we still, or so many other countries where that aspect of the free movement of people has to be prioritized. But of course, we need to understand the limitations that exist, especially when it comes to the implementation of the free movement of people, the issue of security within certain countries. So certain countries still try to, balance between the free movement of people and also internal security. If you also have noticed that in 2023, we have other protocols that are related to the free movement of people, which were signed and adopted by the African Union, which were on investment and intellectual property, which were also very important. And recently, in where I think our president was there in Egypt, where we had the Business Expo, which was also funded partly by the African Free Trade Continental Area, which was a platform that was created to link African investors and policymakers in one room so that they can, share ideas on, developing Africa economically.
Doc, I like the insight you've given us. Rutendo, I know your forte is anti-sanctions, not just for Zimbabwe, but for all 54 countries. We have certain official and unofficial sanctions and embargoes and things like that. These free trade areas and free trade agreements, movements of people, as a mitigation and as an empowerment move, how far have we gone? Have there been any implementation of certain things? I mean, if I can go to Botswana, which is a day's drive, Nchingoshansa Chitupa, my ID, it stops me from importing certain things from Europe and places like that. How far have we gone in the year 2023?
For me, I think the scary part is that we're focusing on the wrong issues, so free movement of people. But we are not looking at who owns the economy in Africa, whether the African economy is owned by Africans, and whether it is Africans that are actually going to be calling the shots within the relationships and the trade agreements that are going to take place on the continent. So with the issue of sanctions that you raise, we've got an issue of South Africa having the most powerful banks and the most powerful industry on the continent. But South Africa being an African country that is controlled by European capital, European banks, European institutions, and in some cases like Standard Bank, it's a Chinese-controlled bank. These guys are implementing European strategies, implementing sanctions through these banks. And then they want to be able now to use their influence in the financial system to control the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and implementing sanctions on African companies, African people to destroy competition in Africa. So in South Africa, for instance, you've got the blocking of bank accounts of black people just on mere allegations. It is alleged that this black person is corrupt, they'll block their account. You've got Iqbal Survey. He's an Indian gentleman who's been trying to create a commercial bank owned by black people. And the banking cabal of South Africa wants to stop him from creating a black bank because they wanted to continue to be controlled by white monopoly, so they decided to try and close his bank accounts.
Is it the same group of bankers that also got into the manipulation of the rand?
Exactly. So you've got this cabal of racist, apartheid-esque type of people that are still following the blueprint of the South African apartheid government's defense strategy. That is to destroy African competition, to destroy African companies, to destroy African self-sufficiency so that there's a dependency on the South African white European economy so that they can continue to control how Africa develops as a form of neocolonialism. They implement US sanctions, they implement Western sanctions, and they cripple African companies based on discrimination and based on racism.
So what you gentlemen are telling me is that in the year 2023, this concept is still sort of a concept with marginal movement. So far you said we have the movement, free movement of people, but the ownership of the economy and who controls the resources and the capital is still something that is really questionable. Now, Africa has had its conflicts.
But I think before you go to the next point, I think he raised a very important question, which I think we have to give justice to it: the issue of who controls the economy. as you have said when you were given an example, that if I go to Botswana, I can be able to import things from Botswana without having a passport and bring that back home. And then comes his point. Who owns that particular shop where I've gone to buy things to Zimbabwe? We might as well be supporting foreign investment in the name of African Free Trade Continental Area. But I liked the idea that we took as Zimbabwe. I would take you back to the early 2000s when we took land. We were trying to address that particular aspect to say, well, we as Africans need to be owners of our resources. And I think the president, if you're following, he has been consistently saying, Nika, before we started this program, we were even having this discussion where we were saying, when you look at Zimbabwe, the manner in which we have empowered our people, especially in the area of mining, where we now have a number of Zimbabweans going into mining, we have Zimbabweans going into farming. I think it addresses that particular aspect.
So we moved them from Mukorokoza to artisanal miner,
yes,
with rights and ability to sell direct to the national refinery without
exactly
having to go through all that red tape. Now, you've spoken about, you really touched into my next point, the issue of resources and ownership. I think it's an open secret, and everyone knows that all conflicts in Africa are based on resources and the scramble of for these resources. In terms of peace and security now, with these free trade areas, what is the current situation, opportunities and threats? If you look at SADC looks very solid in terms of security. Central Africa, the DRC is the hotspot. You have the Sahel region and other regions that are unstable. With these, continental free trade areas, what can we expect, and what are the changes we've seen in peace and security?
No, the perception that SADC is at peace is a very dangerous perception, because we've got the United States government having put weapons and new helicopters and military equipment in Zambia. And many people don't understand that military equipment has been deployed as part and parcel of what the United States calls the New Silk Route. They want to be able to be 3 hours away from invading any capital in Africa, so they're putting bases throughout the whole of Africa. There was always the base in Botswana, but now they've got a live base in Zambia, and the helicopters that are being talked about are not the only military equipment that is there. Anybody who's flown to Zambia lately knows that there's more military equipment there. That's one. Number two, we've got the European Union signed something that is called the European Peace Initiative. It was a means of a defense assistance pact that Europe has with Africa and the AU, that they signed with the AU. This time, the previous pact, they used to be able to give the AU money, which it deploys to African countries, but now the new European Peace Initiative allows the European countries to fund individual African countries with weapons and to give them training, which then can be used to attack each other.
Richard, you are on fire right now. What we're going to do is we're going to take a break, and as soon as we take a break and get into the third segment, we want to go exactly from that peace and security point of view, because as Focus 54, it is one of our priorities to discuss the peace and security issues across all 54 states that make the African continent. This is Focus 54. It's heated up in studio, and we're going to come back straight to Rutendo, and he's going to give us points 2, 3, and 4 for the security situation in Africa. Welcome back to the third segment of Focus 54, and I did say that the studio is on fire. It's absolutely heated up. We were discussing the issue of African continental free trade agreement areas, and one of the main issues we're talking about is the implementation of peace and security. And Rutendo, sorry to cut you off on point number 2 when you're discussing the fact that certain superpowers have military equipment and bases within SADC region, which we assume is completely safe.
Yes, so I was saying that, so we've got the Americans, they've got the base now that is established as AFRICOM in Zambia. They've got military equipment deployed there, ready to be deployed anywhere in this region. We've already got a standby base that is in Tswelopelo, I forget the name, in Botswana. And then we now got the Europeans having signed the new agreement with FARC. And I bring up the issue of Faki because he has been an instrument of the West, particularly the French, within the African Union. And he's the one who signed the European Peace Initiative that allows the European countries to choose and cherry pick countries that they're going to give military equipment and that they're going to put military training advisors. And this can be used to make African countries fight each other. Then we've got South Africa. They're going into elections next year. The DA is looking to have a coalition that takes away power from the ANC and puts back power into the racist hands of the former apartheid system. And the DA has been very clear. It comes into power, it's going to sanction Zimbabwe. It comes into power, it's going to start aligning with the West. And now the question is, do we go back, if the DA comes in, are we going to have an African Continental Free Trade Area, or are we going to go back to post-apartheid era where South Africa is used as a destabilizing force of this region to remove revolutionary governments and to remove particularly black governments that are strong in bringing empowerment to the region. So that's another threat that is happening in South Africa. We need the ANC to remain in power if we are going to have peace in this region, and if we don't want the Americans to have a foothold to try and destabilize this region with Zambia and now South Africa and Botswana. At least with Botswana, Masisi is not happy with the American situation. That's why they've moved to Zambia, where they've got their puppet that they brought into power by rigging elections and hacking the electoral system, which is what they tried to do in Zimbabwe this year.
So you showed us the dark side of potentially a region, which I thought, in my mind, the SADC region is the epitome of safety and all of that. But Doc, you have always told us to use some of the Zimbabwean solutions at a regional scale. In terms of security and peace, what have we done as Zimbabweans that can be implemented in which areas in Africa, immediately, to say, let's take this blueprint from Zimbabwe and multiply it 54 times?
I think the main issue should not only be about Zimbabwe per se, because different countries have different laws and different ways they handle things. The issue is, if we want to talk about peace and security at a continental level, we have to emphasize on collective security. So when you read the African Union Constitutive Act, I think it should be Article 4H, which speaks about collective security. The whole of the African Union, we have been lagging behind when it comes to that particular aspect. Of course, this year we were able to constitute the African Union Standby Force, right, which is meant to intervene in the event of a situation that requires intervention from the African Union perspective. But do we have that particular capacity to intervene as African Union? Probably no. Because we have seen conflicts happening right in our eyes, and the African Union or member states have failed to do so. But of course, as we have asked, as a country, what do we have to do? The issue should be emphasizing peace, of course, and also the issue of sovereignty. We have to respect sovereignty, but to a certain level where, countries or people are using sovereignty as a cover for human rights violations or abuse, we should, as a continent, be able to solve that particular problem. You saw what happened in Sudan, and you also saw what happened in a number of some other, West African countries, where the African Union was unable to go there and find a lasting solution. We will end up having now the Western countries coming. You would remember the issue of Libya, where the African Union was not able to deal with that particular issue of, yes. And then we had NATO coming in, filling that particular gap. So we don't want to continue allowing such situations to happen. We have to take charge of our affairs as the African continent so that we prevent foreigners from coming.
And before you go on, you need to understand that Zimbabwe had set a precedence on how it is that certain conflicts can be dealt with by powerful regional partners and leaders. In Mozambique, we went and intervened militarily, and we stopped the chaos that was happening there. But what many people do not understand is the Mozambican war was a proxy war for the apartheid war against apartheid. And our defeat of the Mozambicans, of the apartheid government and their proxies Renamo in Mozambique, also was able to be telegraphed with the defeat of the Boers in Angola. And that caused them to now retreat and go back home, where they now were sitting in a threat that they were going to be attacked by Cuba, Zimbabwe, and the SADC region on their own soil, so they had to negotiate for peace. We also had Zimbabwe being deployed to Congo at a time where the idea was to remove Laurent Kabila and to balkanize Congo into 5 separate, easy-to-loot states. But Zimbabwe's intervention, together with the Namibians and the Angolans, stopped that and caused a peace accord to be signed in Sun City that has kept Congo as one country today and has kept Congo and the region stable. Now we continue to have a situation where Zimbabwe had to be put under sanctions to stop it from having that role as an American type of military force that goes and intervenes and causes wars to stop. And remember, Zimbabwe went into Angola as well and killed Savimbi to stop the Angolan civil war. And that's why we're put under sanctions. So we need to stop countries like Zimbabwe from being put under sanctions and isolated, to keep them strong and to make other countries strong so that they can intervene in wars, particularly where terrorists and proxies of the West are being funded to destabilize the continent.
In the interest of time, I'm so afraid to ask my last question, because I know this one will leave us looking for part 2 and 3. But with the concept of a continental free trade area, how do we achieve this with no central bank and no central regional peace force? How?
It's a good question, because even the African Bank itself, it was started by the Nigerians together with other African countries, and all of a sudden they felt the need to invite the French, to invite the Americans, the Japanese, and the imperialists to come in and to form a form of neo-colonialism through the banking system. And the question is why? So we need to form a Central African banking system that is created by African countries, African resources, but that's why reparations have to be central to Africa's future development, because Europe needed a Marshall Plan. Africa needs reparations for the colonialism and the slavery and the sanctions that continue for us to develop the kitty and the pot that we need to take us forward.
Doc, with no central bank, no central unit, like you said, a peace force, is this continental free trade area really going to function?
Of course, there is a challenge, but I think so far we have made a bit of progress, right, in terms of making sure that we fulfill that particular aspect. Of course, the bank does have challenges, which it currently have, but it then takes us as Africans now to put our heads together if we truthfully want to implement, the unification of Africa in terms of economics, peace and security, that we have to put our resources together. We have to make sure that we fight our causes together. We have to support each other whenever necessary. We have seen in the past is Zimbabwe, we have had support from quite a number of African countries in terms of the sanctions. While we were fighting sanctions, we have had quite a number of African countries, especially SADC and so forth, supporting us. So I'm saying, moving forward, this is one of the things that we need to do. And of course, finally, as the president has said, I think this is a concept that I think every African needs to understand, that it is only us as Africans who can build the African continent. No one else will come. They will only come and loot, not to build our continent. It's only us as Africans who can do it.
Unfortunately, when you have these type of guests in studio, you need a continuous series of information. But I think the one thing that does stand out is that Africans need to own their destiny. We need a unified African consciousness that makes us a bit more awake of our history, our current situation, and where we're going. And if we are to have these continental free trade areas, we really need to be cognizant of all the facets that allow this to function. And thank you so much to our guests for coming through. This is the end of Focus 54. I do encourage you to Google their names and go online and look for Rutendo Matinyara and Leopold Chakanyuka and find out what they have to say about these and more issues, and you can reach out to them. This is Focus 54, and my name is Jeffrey Murimbechi.